Avinash, is my screen seen?
Yes, sir. Visible, sir.
Hello, Avinash.
Yes, sir.
Avinash, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. I can see your
No,
screen
you
is
are
visible.
muted. You are muted.
Oh, sir.
Mute yourself.
I am unmuted.
No, I cannot hear you.
You can't hear me. So again,
Yes.
let me.
Yeah. Is my screen seen?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I'll start.
Yes, sir.
Late. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So the topic for discussion today is acute pancreatitis. Acute pancreatitis clinically. So when a patient presents with sudden onset, moderate to severe upper abdominal pain, acute pancreatitis should figure in differential diagnosis. Agreed that this is not the commonest cause of acute upper abdomen. We have other more common conditions like acute cholecystitis, acute gastritis, other complications of peptic ulcer disease, maybe liver abscess and other conditions. In a patient with acute upper abdomen, you must keep acute pancreatitis as one of the possible differential diagnoses. Because if you don't think about it, you are likely to miss it. The reverse is also true. When you think clinically of acute pancreatitis, there is always a possibility that it may not be acute pancreatitis, but it may be something else. And more importantly, it may be a surgical condition, which conservative management. So this is an example where this was a young lady where clinically a diagnosis of acute pancreatitis was made, and at some point in time a CT scan was done, which, as you can see here, that's the superior mesenteric artery, that's the superior mesenteric vein, showed a thrombus, an acute thrombotic event in the superior mesenteric vein. Fortunately, she had only a segmental gangrene of the intervened. We could resect and restore. So acute pancreatitis is a great mimic, and it should always be kept in mind when a patient presents with acute upper abdomen. The classical criteria for diagnosing acute pancreatitis are clinical, biochemical, and imaging. So clinical picture of acute upper abdomen, more than 3 times the normal, and imaging evidence. And imaging, like in any other acute abdomen, the first investigation would today almost always be ultrasound. But we have to keep in mind that although the classical findings that bulky, edematous, enlarged pancreas with peripancreatic fluid or stranding are characteristic, but not rule out a diagnosis of acute pancreatitis. So any two of these 3 features, clinical, biochemical, and imaging, would make a diagnosis of acute pancreatitis. Also, we have to keep in mind that if the patient is obese, or if there is a lot of ileus or gastric dilatation, the sonographic evaluation may not be adequate, and it may be an incomplete or inadequate evaluation. As I would discuss a little later, the classical the confirmed diagnosis is made on a CT scan with IV contrast, but that is done usually little later for reasons which I will deal with later. At the same time, like in any other patient with acute upper abdomen, especially if the patient is middle-aged or elderly, a chest X-ray and with the domes of diaphragm, an abdominal X-ray and ECG must be done, because we know that an acute upper abdomen, which looks like an acute upper abdomen clinically, may actually be an acute pulmonopleural. And therefore, these investigations are very, very important. And if you see free air, this air could be in the stomach, could be in the splenic flexure, but this air under the right dome of diaphragm is extraluminal air, suggesting a perforated viscus. And I'm sure all of us who have a few years of clinical experience have had cases where we thought it is an acute abdomen, but it turned out to be a cardiac or pulmonopleural event. Now, evaluation of pancreas is done using the classical pancreatic protocol CT, which involves negative oral or contrast or no oral contrast, a large volume of contrast injected very rapidly with an infusion pump, and images taken in quick succession, preferably thin slice multi-detector CT, which is then reconstructed. Now, why I say at 3 to 7 days? Because the main purpose of doing the CT, as we would discuss a little later, is to see, and non-enhancing pancreas would mean pancreatic necrosis. So when we have acute pancreatitis, the first aim is to see the severity. And one of the features to say that this is severe acute pancreatitis is presence of significant necrosis. Necrosis would not be seen if you do the CT too early. So if you do it in the first 1 or 2 days or 3 days, necrosis may not be evident. And that is why if you are dealing with acute pancreatitis, the timing of even 7 days. Here, what we see is a normal enhancing pancreas, but there is peripancreatic edema. So this is acute pancreatitis, but no necrosis. The only exception where we would do an early CT, even at the time of presentation, would be if the diagnosis is in doubt, which means that we cannot confidently rule out another cause of acute upper abdomen, especially a surgical cause. So a patient who has underlying cardiovascular, peripheral vascular or cerebrovascular disease, who has a reason to have a thromboembolic disorder where we cannot be sure whether it is acute pancreatitis or a mesenteric vascular accident, then definitely a CT scan should be done even at the time of presentation. The other indication for an early here, it's not in the course of disease, but in terms of presentation to the hospital or to the emergencies, if we are sure that it is acute pancreatitis, but we suspect cleaning of the bowel, perforation of the bowel, or a bleed, which we cannot rule out. So these are the exceptions where even on the day of presentation, a CT scan would probably be done. Of course, because these patients may have renal dysfunction, you must make sure that the patient is well hydrated, renal functions are normal before you go ahead with CT scan with such large volume of nephrotoxic contrast. Now, once we have made the diagnosis of acute, the severity. So classically, it used to be mild and severe, but now in some classifications, the term moderate has also been introduced. So the severe pancreatitis could be either clinical when you have evidence of organ failure. It could be morphological when you have necrosis, either more than 30% of the volume or more than 3 centimeter diameter, and the CT severity index taking various parameters into account, or any of the local complications. Is not taken as a local complication, but at a later stage, if a cyst forms or if there is necrosis or an abscess formation, they will all qualify as severe acute pancreatitis. There are many biochemical criteria. Some are very complex, like Renson and Apache, and some are single parameter criteria like CRP and procalcitonin, which have also been used to indicate severity of acute pancreatitis. So in terms of organ failure, it is mainly respiratory or less significant are cardiovascular and GI bleed, because patients who have respiratory or renal organ failure do worse as compared to those who have cardiovascular or GI bleed as the organ failure. Also, patients who have persistent organ failure, that means the organ failure doesn't improve or deteriorate even after providing organ support, do worse as compared to those who have transient reversible organ failure, where the organ functions come back to 3 days of supportive treatment. Now, once we know that it is severe acute pancreatitis, the next step is to know whether there is necrosis. Why is it important? Because if there is necrosis, the morbidity and mortality are much higher as compared to patients with no necrosis. And as I said earlier, the only way that necrosis of pancreatic parenchyma can be diagnosed is by doing a contrast enhanced CT scan and the parenchymal phase, which is a late arterial phase. So this is a good uniformly enhancing pancreatic parenchyma. And here you see that only very little of the parenchyma is enhancing, and most of the rest of the pancreas, including the head and the body and tail, is non-enhancing. So this is necrosis. And that is the reason why most people would do the CT scan at about a week's time, because by the time the extent, you can know how severe the acute pancreatitis is. Now, once we make the diagnosis of necrosis, then it is very important to know whether the necrosis is sterile or infected. Because if it is infected, the mortality is almost twice as compared to sterile necrosis. And the risk of infection depends on the amount of necrosis, which would be evident on CT, and the duration. And duration of necrosis in so large necrosis and longer the duration, more are the chances of infection. And conventionally, it was said that infected pancreatic necrosis, the mortality without intervention would be almost 100%. But there are exceptions to this rule. Now, how do we establish infection? The gold standard is image-guided fine needle aspiration. And students, don't call this FNAC. This is only FNA. You remove the fluid and same. So image-guided FNA. The problem is that while doing this, you may introduce infection in a sterile necrosis. So it has to be done with complete asepsis. There are many groups which now, as a routine, do not do FNA to diagnose infection of necrosis. They use clinical, CT, and biochemical parameters as indirect indicators of sepsis. So fever and leukocytosis, although you must remember that fever of acute pancreatitis, not necessarily infection. But generally, if the organ failure is persisting beyond first week, it indicates that the necrosis is infected. And presence of AR on CT scan and high procalcitonin level are also indirect markers of infection of pancreatic necrosis. Now, there is another classification which classifies acute pancreatitis into 4 groups, and they means whether there is necrosis or not, and if it is there, whether it is sterile or infected, and the systemic complications of organ failure, and as I said, whether it is transient or persistent. So based on a combination of these 2 criteria, it could be mild acute pancreatitis, that means there is no necrosis and no organ failure. Here, the morbidity is low and mortality should be virtually 0. These patients can be managed in the general ward. Moderate acute pancreatitis, where there is necrosis but it is sterile, or severe when it is infected necrosis or there is persistent organ failure. And critical, another group they added, where the mortality is very, very high in spite of whatever intervention we may do, which is infected necrosis and organ failure persisting beyond 1 week. Before we go on to management, it's very important to understand the pathophysiology of acute pancreatitis. And mainly, it is third space fluid loss resulting in hemodynamic instability. Causes To begin with, intra-abdominal hypertension and then abdominal compartment syndrome, which affects other organ function. It is inflammation, systemic inflammatory response. And then because of the inflammation, there is translocation of the bacteria from the gut into the peritoneal cavity, causing infection of the necrosis and then systemic sepsis. Endotoxemia, which causes multiple system organ failure, and severe catabolic state, which is responsible for malnutrition. Have to be kept in mind when we are managing patients with acute pancreatitis. Now, by and large, acute pancreatitis in the first 2 weeks is a medical, that means a non-surgical disease. So there is very little role of surgical intervention in the first 2 weeks of acute pancreatitis, except when there are complications which need surgical intervention, such as gangrene and perforation, or a massive bleed which cannot be controlled by radiological interventions. With moderate or severe pancreatitis should appropriately go to a high dependency or intensive care unit. Nutrition is a very important component of management, which could be nasogastric, nasojejunal, and if the patient is not able to tolerate any enteral feed, then parenteral nutrition. Vigorous fluid resuscitation, there's a lot of debate about this now, and now we are going back to optimal fluid resuscitation. Role of antibiotics to begin with, even this is very, very controversial, and there is evidence for and against. We should not forget that these patients have severe abdominal pain, which needs to be looked after, and counseling of the patient and the relatives, because although it is a benign disease, but sometimes it behaves even worse than a malignancy, because in malignancy, at least based on stage, you can predict the prognosis. Here, sometimes it is very, very difficult to predict the outcome of these patients. How many days the patient will require in the ICU, what kind of supportive treatment will be required, is sometimes difficult to predict. So that's a nasojejunal tube which has been placed for feeding, and you see 2 tubes because this patient has inflammatory gastroparesis. One is to drain the stomach and other is to be used for feeding, post-pyloric feeding. So all these patients, since they have organ dysfunction and organ failure, they require organ support. So oxygenation, inotropes, control of sugars, renal support, acid suppression, and calcium has to be monitored, because these patients can go into severe hypocalcemia. The best antibiotics to be used are quinolones, piperacillin, carbapenems, of course, are the drug of choice, and anaerobes, because there is translocation of gut bacteria. If this is one condition where if antibiotics are to be used, they should be given at least for 2 weeks. There was earlier a lot of support for selective gut decontamination to take care of the translocation, but I think it has fallen out of favor. And patients who have been on long-term antibiotics and who have had multiple interventions may require prophylactic antifungal. Now, as I said, in the initial 2 weeks, the management is largely non-surgical, non-interventional. But at some stage, a large number of these patients require interventions. Now, it is important to know which patients require intervention, when do they require intervention, what intervention, and how is it to be done. So the indications of intervention, not surgical intervention, are infected pancreatic necrosis with systemic sepsis. As I said earlier, conventionally, it was said that if you do not intervene on infected pancreatic necrosis, the mortality is 100%. But there are anecdotal reports of a reasonable number of cases where even infected pancreatic necrosis has been managed conservatively. Sterile necrosis, if there is no response to maximal, and in some patients which are in a very desperate situation with multiple organ dysfunction, many a time our colleagues in the intensive care in the critical medicine department ask us to intervene because there is no other option and patient is not improving. And whether intervention helps in patients who have gone into abdominal compartment syndrome is again a debatable issue. So the classical approach of intervention in acute pancreatitis today is what is known as a step-up approach. So it goes on to endoscopic and then surgical, where also it is minimally invasive followed by open. So percutaneous could be definitive. So if there are infected peripancreatic fluid collections, then percutaneous drainage alone may be enough and no more treatment other than organ support and conservative treatment may be required. It may be delaying tactic because we don't want to operate upon these patients early. So we want to buy some time by draining these infected or intestinal obstruction or biliary obstruction. And it can be adjuvant. Adjuvant means that we have done some other intervention, but there are residual collections. We don't want to go in again and they are treated percutaneously. It could be endoscopic transgastric with the help of endoscopic ultrasound so that the target is easily hit. And now, earlier it was for fluid collections because they were easy to drain, but now with the lumen which is created between the stomach and the cavity to a reasonable size, even the scope can go into the cavity. Even transgastric endoscopic necrosectomy is feasible and is being done. Surgical approach to begin with, and in selected suitable cases, should be minimally invasive. So minimally invasive necrosectomy or the classical conventional open necrosectomy when the necrosis is extending all over the abdomen and a minimally invasive. Students, remember that the word used for dealing with acute pancreatitis is either drainage of fluid collection or an abscess. Abscess, of course, is not a term used today, or necrosectomy. It is not resection. Many a time I hear students talking about resection for necrotizing pancreatitis. It is not a resection, it is necrosectomy. What about endoscopic intervention of the biliary tree in patients? Earlier evidence suggested that only in patients with severe acute pancreatitis, within 48 hours of the onset, if you intervene, it may be of some help. But this endoscopic intervention is not easy. All this area is going to be severely inflamed, vascular, bleeds. So this intervention has to be done by a very experienced endoscopist. The other indication is when the stones, CVD stones on their own are causing cholangitis intervention, not acute pancreatitis. The recent meta-analysis showed that early endoscopic intervention in acute pancreatitis, there was no difference in mortality, but complications were less. The surgical procedure, as I said, is necrosectomy. So it is a non-anatomical resection, which could be laparoscopic, minimally invasive retroperitoneal approach, or an open necrosectomy. Blunt instrument like the finger or a suction tip, not knife or scissors or an energy source. So whatever comes easily with the blunt dissection is removed and rest is left behind, which would be normal or not completely necrotic parenchyma. Now, when we are in, it is usually advisable to add a feeding jejunostomy, and if there is any doubt about the involvement of the transverse, if it is not frankly ischemic or gangrenous, many surgeons would have a very low threshold to do a diverting loop ileostomy to take care of a future colonic fistula. Colonic fistula is a very poor prognostic factor in terms of morbidity and mortality in severe necrotizing acute pancreatitis. The timing of surgical intervention is very, very important. And now it is well established that earlier you do the, so as far as possible, we don't want to operate within 2 weeks, and preferably we want to delay the surgical intervention to beyond 4 weeks. And that is where the role of percutaneous and endoscopic intervention to delay the possible surgical intervention is very important. And why 4 weeks? Because we want the necrotic process to have become localized so that necrosectomy becomes easy, it doesn't bleed, either you don't get into the normal parenchyma, or if you are too conservative with necrosis, and the need for re-intervention should become less. So this is how a minimally invasive retroperitoneal approach or video-assisted retroperitoneal drainage is done. And the best cases which are suitable for this are those which are in the tail and distal body of the pancreas, because if the necrotic process is the head, those cases may not be very suitable. So it is a CT guided, first a percutaneous drain is placed, then this tract is dilated up to about 34 French, and then either a rigid nephroscope or even an open approach peritoneal flank incision going behind the colon, and then large bore drains are placed for irrigation. Now, as I said, counseling of these patients is important because on an average, these patients, those with severe necrotizing, especially infected pancreatitis, patients may have to stay in the hospital for weeks and months. They may require long intensive care stays. Need for re-operation, or now, of course, not re-operation, but re-intervention is high. Costs may run into lakhs of rupees and remain in double figures and even higher than that. So I would like to end up and summarize by saying that acute pancreatitis is an acute upper abdomen. But both clinically and on investigations, you must first rule out a surgical cause like a peptic ulcer perforation, like a mesenteric vascular accident, which require early and immediate surgical intervention. Otherwise, the patient would have morbidity and diagnosis of acute pancreatitis, which is clinical, biochemical, and imaging. The next step is to assess the severity. Classical was mild and severe, but now we have moderate. These are patients who have transient organ dysfunction. So they start with as if they are severe, but then the organ function improves and they behave like mild. So in this, the morbidity may be high, but mortality is not high. But more important is to identify severe acute pancreatitis systemic parameters. Once we know it is severe acute pancreatitis, it is important to know whether there is necrosis, and that can be done only by a contrast enhanced CT scan. Classical algorithm was that once you have necrosis, you do a fine needle aspiration to say whether it is sterile or infected. But many centers now follow the algorithm that once they know it is necrotic or necrotizing pancreatitis, they manage the patient conservatively with intensive organ support. Worsens, whether it is sterile or infected, they feel that there is a need for intervention or, in some cases, surgery. A word about etiology, because if the etiology is stones or alcohol, then obviously, or some other conditions, you will have recurrent episodes of acute pancreatitis. So a patient who has had 2 or more episodes would classify as recurrent acute pancreatitis. And some people would exclude these two easily. Keep in mind that a normal ultrasound doesn't rule out stones as the cause of acute pancreatitis because patient may be having microlithiasis, which may not be picked up on a routine casual ultrasound by not so experienced somnologist. So we have now methods like endoscopic ultrasound, or a method which was very favorite of Dr. Saraswat, where he used to collect the duodenal bile and look at it, which would confirm the diagnosis of gallstone-related acute pancreatitis. And then, if these two common causes are not there, then you have to look into other causes, which could be anatomical or metabolic or drugs. And if none of these causes can be found out based on investigations such as MRCP, endoscopic ultrasound, and a detailed metabolic profile, then the patient will be labeled as idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis. Could be underlying chronic pancreatitis, which may not be very evident. So patient may be having actually recurrent episodes of acute on chronic pancreatitis, which may be missed in the early stages. So prevention is okay. That's all. Thank you very much. I think there are a lot of senior faculty members. I'm very happy to inform that my former colleague at SCPGI, Dr. Vivek Saraswat, has Medical College and Hospital today. He's also there in the audience. So first, I would request Dr. Saraswat to make some comments about acute pancreatitis, and then other faculty members who are there, and students can ask questions. Thank you.
Dr. Saraswat has just left with the management. I think he's just gone.
Yeah. This is his first day today, so he may be doing some. He had joined me. Start with Ajay. Avinash, you want to add anything? Avinash, you are muted. Please unmute.
Sir, you have very nicely covered all the topic very precisely. If you go in more detail, then we can add point from beginning the hydration, how we should patient give proper hydration at the day 1 or day 2 at the beginning of the diagnosis when we don't know what the infarction, then we try to limit the fluid restriction. On the other hand, we found is a perforation or acute pancreatitis, then we need to give more fluid resuscitation. When these patients third space fluid loss is going to be more. So that comes also important point while they're assessing this patient. And you also covered that briefly on the nutrition aspect. But yes, and we should encourage the early nutrition in these patients, whether it is an enteral by the way of mouth, or if not possible, moderate to severe case, then we can start the nasogastric. Or then we can start nasodegenerative tube also, sir. So these 2 points I want to add on that. Otherwise, you have covered very well in all the aspects, sir. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, Ajay, you want to add anything?
Yes, sir. Morning, everybody. I think it was a very nicely covered topic, which is actually a very long topic, which may require the entire week for its discussion. But there are some important things I think which sir has already highlighted. Dr. Kapoor has already mentioned that initially it is a medical disease. We have one misunderstanding in the general physicians or maybe in our colleague practitioners is that as soon as it is an acute pancreatitis, surgical reference is required. But I think you have mentioned it on 2 weeks, but I would say that it is beyond 4 weeks that surgical intervention is required. But beyond 2 weeks, definitely a surgical gastroenterologist has to be in loop, because most of the interventions which we see, if they are done in an aseptic manner, they will prevent that infection. Specifically, which you have very validly mentioned, that it is not the finite aspirin fluid which is being sent for microbiology and culture. That is one of the very common sources of infection being inoculated from skin into the abscess cavity or the sterile necrosis possibly. So most of the centers don't use it because of the lack of sterility. But I think, yes, very well covered topic, and almost for every aspect that the student should know. But it's a very nice topic. I think the students can ask if they have something specific on that.
Only thing I would add is that although whenever I talk to them that it is not a surgical disease, but I insist that when they see the patient first time, they must get a surgical consultation, because otherwise surgical causes may not come to the mind of a physician. We have had, I'm sure all of us have seen patients who had a perforation or gangrene, which were initially thought of as acute pancreatitis. So a surgical consultation is very, very important. Anand? Anand, you want to say anything?
That I think there is a third thing which is equally important, sir, currently, because of the minimally invasive nature of the interventions. The type and especially the manner in which the interventions are done, I think, has a very major outcome. And for example, even a simple drainage procedure can be done in a number of ways. And what happens a number of times is that improper drainage leads to even more and more complications. For example, when the doing it in a dependent manner does a number of things. It'll allow us for better drainage in case those drains need to be upsized and an ecosectomy needs to be done minimally invasive. Those things become possible. So that planning of the drainage, I think, is equally important, and it's something that I think more and more is being recognized and allows for a much quicker and recovery for these patients.
Yeah, so preferably the drainage has to be. Yeah, Ajay, go ahead.
That because most of the times what happens is the intervention radiologist who take a decision, he has to go through a site which should not interfere with any of the bowel humans, or it should not interfere with any of the vascular structures. So what it is very difficult for them to find a good site from where he can intervene. So the whatever is available, he should drain. I think that is more important. Rather, I would more emphasize on the fact that if we have 2 drains placed, it can be used for irrigation. That is a more important aspect in this, rather than putting it in a very good. If you don't have, still put in a drain and rather try to ask them to put another tube into it. Sir, yes, sorry, you may continue, sir.
Yeah, so that is why it has to be image guided drainage, and many radiologists would actually, in difficult access, would like to use CT rather than ultrasound, because they would try to avoid a transviscous drainage as much as possible. Although many a time a transgastric drainage has to be done because the collection is located behind the stomach, and if it is more towards the head, there is no other approach. Image guided drainage, if it can be dependent gravity supported, best, but as Ajay said, that whatever drainage is possible, and many a time we try to place 2 tubes, one for drainage and one for irrigation. Anand, you want to say anything before we move on to the students? Unmute yourself, please. Okay, students. Any student?
Good morning, sir. My name is Kapil.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I have a doubt, sir. My question is, how do we differentiate after the history, whether it is recurrent acute pancreatitis or chronic pancreatitis, if the patient does not have any exocrine endocrine insufficiencies?
Yeah, so as I said, that patients with underlying chronic pancreatitis can and do have recurrent episodes of acute pancreatitis. If the chronic pancreatitis is obvious, that means the duct is, and it is a diagnosed case of chronic pancreatitis, then there is no problem. But we know that in the early stages, chronic pancreatitis is difficult to diagnose. So a good MRCP or an endoscopic ultrasound may be required to diagnose chronic pancreatitis. You don't have to have endocrine or exocrine function to diagnose chronic pancreatitis. If they are there, fine. I mean, they support the diagnosis, but it is not necessary to have that. It is only the anatomical changes in the pancreatic duct as done by an MRCP or an endoscopic ultrasound. But we all have again seen patients where in the initial episode of acute pancreatitis, chronic pancreatitis was not obvious, and it was later that we diagnosed chronic pancreatitis. But as I said, it has to be kept in mind that patient who's having recurrent acute pancreatitis, where you don't find any other possible cause, there may be underlying chronic pancreatitis, which will become manifest later.
Sir, my doubt was, how do we differentiate during case presentation after they give a provisional diagnosis of recurrent acute or chronic?
No, recurrent acute means that there are episodes of pain and in between the patient is asymptomatic. Whereas if there is underlying symptomatic chronic pancreatitis, then patient will give the classical history that there is always pain which is there and it is superimposed by these episodes. So if that history of long-term continuous pain, which is almost always there, what is classically described most days of the week and most weeks of the month. So if that kind of a history is present, then you know that there is underlying chronic pancreatitis. But early chronic pancreatitis may be totally asymptomatic, and that is where the doubt comes. And then clinically, there is no way that you can say there is chronic pancreatitis. So in the exam, if you get a patient who has a history of chronic pancreatitis and then has episode of acute pancreatitis, then you make a diagnosis of acute pancreatitis.
Thank you.
Can I
Sir.
take that? So can I take that? Actually, I think I don't remember your name, Kapil. Kapil, the question is whether the patient has an acute pancreatitis right now or a recurrent chronic pancreatitis with an acute episode. So definitely, if it is based only on history, then a classical history of a chronic pancreatitis is very clear. It has to be pain, weight loss, diabetes. If the patient does not have that, and the patient has an episode of acute pain right now, tachycardia, then I don't think you should keep into mind a history of chronic pancreatitis as a differential into it. This is actually an acute pancreatitis. Yes, maybe once you investigate, as Sir has rightly said, you get a CT or MR and you find the changes of calcification of the pancreas. Now comes the picture of a chronic pancreatitis, which is having an acute episode. Based on just on history, then it is very clear history that it is a chronic, means it is a chronic symptom, acute means it is a recent onset. So differentiation is there itself made already at the
Okay. Sir. Thank you. Sir.
most.
Any other student? I'm not very happy when students don't ask. See, we started this session mainly for you. So it should not become a one-way dialogue. That is why I would prefer those sessions where students speak more rather than we talk more. So,
Monil should ask. Krishna?
I'm sure there will be hundreds of doubts in your minds. That is why we started this forum, that you don't feel hesitant, you don't feel scared to ask. So all students, please come with questions and don't hesitate to ask. It is better to clear your doubts now rather than have problems in the exam. Can we close? Any student wants to ask anything? Anand, can we close then? Avinash?
Yes, we can close now, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for arranging this. Thank you very much.
Thanks for a nice session.
Thanks, Ajay. Thank you.
Bye.